Hello friends, welcome to iAspirant. In this video we are going to discuss about Prajamandal Movement. During the British rule, there are 26 princely states in Odisha. Odisha enjoyed sovereign power during that time. Gradually the kings of these 26 areas became repressive. Exploitation and repression became a characteristic feature of all native states. The people were exploited through several means of taxation like rishad, magan, beti, begari. Finally, when exploitation of the people became unbearable, they were captivated by a burning desire to revolt. Their accumulated hatred and anger against the ruling princes were manifested in the Prajamandal movement. Appearance of native states. During the Gajapati rule in Odisha, the hereditary feudatory kings ruling in the hilly tracts of Odisha had been enjoying internal sovereignty of power since the days of the Mughals. When Mughals ruling Odisha was Odisha have the sovereign power, but in the areas occupied by the Mughals are called Mughalbandi kingdom. The Mughal administrative system was in operation at the time. The, the kings of these mountainous states or Gajat states paid taxes and homage to the Mughal. When the Marathas occupied Odisha, the kings of these Gajat areas paid tribute to the Marathas in exchange for retaining their internal sovereignty. The people of Odisha paid taxes to the Maratha king. In return, Marathas safeguard the territory of Odisha. That is, the Gajat princes paid taxes to the British when British occupied Odisha in 1803. In 1936, the new Odisha province was created, and in the same year, the Eastern States Agency was divided into three sections. In the year 1936, Odisha divided into three sections. Eastern States Agency was split into three sections. In the Odisha State Agency, there are 26 Gajat regions under the Odisha division. 23 were retained in Odisha and the 3 remaining are outside. Mayurbhanj stayed in the Bengal Agency, right? Whereas Kalahandi and Patna, there are 3, Mayurbhanj, Kalahandi and Patna. They are not the part of Odisha in 1936. Kalahandi and Patna were retained under the Chhattisgarh Agency. Okay. In 1937, in accordance with the importance of these native states, they were divided into Section A, B and C. The people's condition gradually became more and more miserable when their economic backbone was broken and they could not endure no more. The people took to revolt against such atrocities. Second, oppression of the kings. Apart from the regular taxes, the kings extracted money and services from the people through various devious means. Among such taxes were beti, begari, magan, rashad, bheti and kar shamagri. Beti was applied for palace construction or garden beautification without paying any wages to the workers. To carry goods and domestic articles of royal officers from one place to another, free of cost was known as begari. Okay. Betty was applied for palace construction or garden beautification without paying any wages to the workers. Was Betty. And begari begari is a oppressive work that Betty was applied for palace construction or garden beautification without paying any wages to the workers. Begari is termed as to carry goods and domestic articles of royal officers from one place to another free of cost was known as begari. When there was either a wedding or a death in the royal family, or even when the king purchased a new car, the people had to pay either in cash or in kind of this was known as magana. When the king's officer toured village areas and put up camps at different places, their food and comforts were to be provided by the Praja or the people, and this was known as Rashad. Bheti. Bheti. Bheti was the gift which was bounded to be offered by the people to the king when the king gave them order. The king was to be provided with rice, pulses, cereals, and ghee at half the market price, and this was known as kar shamagri. Okay. The people had to endure such tyrannical whims of the king. In future, however, they became the means to incite the people to revolt, and thus paved the way for the Prajamandal movement. Frequent tax increase. Okay. The other factor leading to the movement was frequent tax increase. Even after exploiting the people in various ways, the kings did not restrain from resorting to frequent tax increase. The people's life became a burden to them, and they were forced to raise revolt against the feudatory chiefs. First phase of the Prajamandal movement between 1908 to 1928, five peasants' rebellions were witnessed in Bamanda. There are five revolts took place between 20 years in 20 years between 1908 to 1928. They resented the unjust tax increase. When a few leaders were imprisoned, the rebellion subsided. In Dhanakanal, a people's rebellion broke out in 1922 under the leadership of Maheshwar Subahu Singh. In Dhanakanal, there was a rebellion took place in 1922 under the leadership of Maheshwar Subahu Singh, and Purnachandra Mahapatra, Benudhar Panda. Three peoples are leading the revolt in 1922, which took place in Dhanakanal. Okay. People's movements were witnessed in Nilagiri also in 1928, in both 1930 and in Talcher 1932. In 1922, Dhanakanal. In 1928, Nilagiri. In 1930, both. In 1932, Talcher. Okay. Conference of the People of Garjat States of Odisha to give a proper direction to the Prajamandal movement. For the first time on 20 June 1931, the Odisha Garjat State People's Association. On 20th June 1931, the Odisha Garjat State People's Association was convened at Cuttack. Its first session was presided over by Bhuvananda Das. First President of Odisha Garizat State People's Association is Bhuvanananda Das. Okay. The conference gave a call to the subject people to establish their rights through rebellion. After this, on 24th June 1937, after 6 years, second session took place. This second session was presided or led by Congress leader Pattabhi Sitaramaya. Pattabhi Sitaramaya. The conference adopted a resolution for the abolition of beggary. What is beggary? To carry goods and goods for the royal officers from one place to another is called beggary. Magan. Magan when the king wants to purchase something, the people have to pay taxes. It's called Magan. Rashad. Bheti. Okay. Bheti, not Beti, here Beti. Bheti is gift. When king's son or daughter getting married, or when a funeral took place, the peoples were bound to give something, that is called Bheti. Hereafter, an inquiry committee was set up under Satish Chandra Bose. Okay. A inquiry committee was set up under Satish Chandra Bose, Balbant Rai Mehta, Prajamandal Das and Sarangadhara Das. The committee was sympathetic to the cause of the Prajas and it supported their demands. This committee was support the demand of Praja. This gave a new momentum to the Prajamandal movement. Okay. Prajamandal movement in different places. Odisha witnessed a number of Prajamandal movement in different parts of the state, which are given below. Prajamandal movement at Nilagiri. In Nilagiri, the 1938 Prajamandal movement at Nilagiri is very special event in the history of Odisha. Under the initiative of Hari Krishna Mahatab, Sarangadhara Das, a Prajamandal was formed at Gariyamal. Its president was Kailash Chandra Mahanti and the secretary was Banmali Das. On 11th July 1938, that is on the day of the Rath Yatra chariot festival, they addressed a huge gathering and made pointed reference to the misrule of the king. Their demands included the formulation of a new agricultural policy to stop paying unjustified taxes and for evolving welfare administrative system. However, the people were advised to achieve their aims through non-violent means. By the king's order, 120 people were arrested, of whom 50 were fined. 70 were arrested. In 120 were arrested, but 50 people were bound to fined 50 rupees each. The rest 70 were put in the jail. When Banmali Das was marching towards Machu Patana, leading 5,000 people to start peaceful satyagraha, the king sought help from the Odisha police. King asked for help and called Odisha police. Finally, through the intervention of political agent Major Bazalgette. This is the Prajamandal movement at Nilagiri. King called to Mr. Bazalgette for help. When Banmali Das marching towards Machua Patna, leading 5,000 people. Okay. Finally, through the intervention of political measures, Hare Krishna Mahatab and the Balaswari magistrate Sulaiman Hare Krishna Mahatab and Baleshwar magistrate Sulaiman. The rebellion came to an end. The people's demands were considered by the king to a very large deal. Next, Dhenkanal Prajamandal Movement. The Praja of Dhenkanal started a rebellion against the payment of Bethi, Magan, Rashad and Sunia Bheti. The objectives of the Prajamandal were printed in pamphlets, were circulated among the people. On 13 September 1938, despite police warning, while Hare Krishna Mahatab, Navakrishna Chaudhary and Sarangadhara Das addressed a mammoth rally, a huge rally of more than 50,000 men, the state police and the British police resorted to lathi charge on the people. The Congress leadership nevertheless advised people not to get cow down by such atrocities, but to continue with the movement in a peaceful manner. Harmohan Patnaik was arrested and sent to Cuttack jail, and houses of many of the Prajamandal leaders were burnt. A 12-year-old boy, Baji Raut, was killed in police firing. Baji Raut was the youngest martyr in the nationalist movement of India. A 12-year-old boy, Baji Raut, was killed in police firing, but the people continued with the movement, hoping to get justice. 29th October 1938 was celebrated as the Galijat Day. Finally, in 1939, as per the report of the Central Police Bureau, the British government withdrew all powers of the King of Dhenkanal. The king's powers were now vested in the hands of Khan Bahadur Eke Khan. Bethi was revoked. Land tax was reduced from 4 annas. Anna. 4 annas to 2 annas, and all arrested leaders were released. Prajamandal Movement in Talcher. Prajamandal Movement in Talcher assumed dangerous proportions, extremely hateful and inhuman treatment like severe caning, spitting and urinating in people's mouth were meted out by the Talcher royal authorities. In 1939, under the leadership of the Talcher Prajamandal President Pavitra Mohan Pradhan, Talcher Prajamandal Movement President Pavitra Mohan Pradhan, the people presented the king a petition of demands for stopping of such barbaric punishments and for the withdrawal of Magana, Rashad, etc. The movement at Talcher was conducted by Kritivas Ratha, Maguni Pradhan, Dasrathi Pani and others. The Prajas or the people. Left Talcher and took refuge in the British-ruled Angul region. Many leaders of the Congress reached Angul, and political agent Mr. Haitian and Hare Krishna Mahatab signed a pact in 1939. This is the famous as the Haitian-Mahatab Agreement. Gandhiji expressed his satisfaction over the agreement. The king had to accept most of the clauses of the agreement. Peace was restored at last, and the people who fled Talcher returned home. Prajamandal Movement in Gangpur. The Gangpur Prajamandal Movement, who assumed a terrified character, upon the death of the king, the queen took charge of the administration into her hand. The Praja of Gangpur mostly belonged to the Munda tribe, and their leader was Nirmal Munda. He protested against tax increase, but his efforts were futile, not fruitful. Hence, he incited the people not to pay taxes. The queen requested the assistant political agent, Lieutenant Major, to arrest Nirmal Munda. While having discussion with the people, the police misinterpreted the people's languages and their signs. It resulted in an unprovoked firing by the British on innocent people, and many were killed and injured. Many denounced the British for having resorted to such barbaric acts, but even then the Queen of Gangpur showed no sympathy to the people. Prajamandal Movement at Ranpur. The Ranpur Prajamandal Movement was a reflection of the old Odisha people's or Praja dissatisfaction against their rules. The people demanded an end to misrule and tyranny, and inaugurated an era of benevolent administration on 27th December 1939. The king imprisoned the rebels, but there was a tremendous uproar for freeing the people. The king became panicky and took shelter under the political agent Major Bazalgette. On 5th January 1939, a huge congregation moved towards the palace. Bazalgette too moved with the police towards the palace. He was surrounded by the people, but he asked them to disperse and clear away from path leading towards the palace. But the people paid no heed to his warning. Bazalgette and opened fire, and one Praja was killed in the firing. Suddenly, the people became violent, and Bazalgette was beaten mercilessly. Helpless, Bazalgette ran towards the house of a Praja to hide under a bullock cart, but under the direction of Raghunath Mahanti and Divakar Parida, he was dragged out and beaten severely. Bazalgette succumbed to his injuries. After this, the British police started a ruthless repression and brought an end to the Ranpur Prajamandal movement. 26 people were tried. Raghunath Mahanti was hanged, and Divakar Parida was deported to the Andamans. Hereafter, the efforts of Hare Krishna Mahtab and Professor N.G. Ranga were successful in finding a way to end the Prajamandal movements. The memories of the martyrs Raghu Divakara were still alive in the minds of all Odia. Prajamandal movement in Nayagad. Prajamandal was constituted in Nayagad in June 1938 under the leadership of Narayanananda. A charter of demands was submitted to the ruling chief. It contained demands of civil liberties, abolition of feudal dues, and people's participation in a responsible government. The Prajamandal resolved to launch an agitation and carry it on till their demands were fulfilled. The Raja arrested the leaders. The Raja arrested the leaders. The people gathered in front of the palace demanding release of their leaders on December 30. Who is the leader? Narayanananda. Okay. On December 30, 1938, the Raja had to release them. He further promised to fulfill their demands. In the meantime, he had sought the assistance of the political agent Major Bazalgette. Okay. The agent came to his help, but before he could deal with the situation, he had to leave Nayagad for Ranpur, where The situation was more serious. Prajamandal movement in Banai, but Banai is in Banai. Okay. At Banai, the Prajamandal was formed in 1938. The Praja raised voice against Betty, etc., and demanded withdrawal of such obnoxious taxes. They submitted a representation to the king. The king considered the demands and withdrew Betty. But for the purpose of construction of roads and government buildings, he levied small taxes on the people. The people, however, held a meeting and decided to disobey the orders of the king. Prajamandal movement in Sanpur. The Sanpur State Prajamandal was formed in December 1938 under the presidency of Bhimsen Bhoi. Its demands were almost the same as in the case of other states: abolition of feudal dues, responsible government, and agrarian legislation. The state government elected two leaders, namely Loknath Satpathy and Mohan Mishra, while they presented the charter of demands. Bhimsen Bhoi and a few others were arrested when they made satyagraha for release of two leaders. Who are these two leaders? Loknath Satpathy and Mohan Mishra. Okay. Prajamandal was banned. Dolamuni Das was expelled from the state. His property was confiscated. In March 1939, Sri Mohan Mishra, Lakshman Satpathy and Pitambar Bhai wanted to meet the resident who was coming to Sanpur. They were arrested on the way. There, there were strong protests against the arrest. People were detained in large number. Trials were made. Imprisonment and fines were imposed. The activities of the Prajamandal slowed down during the First, World War Second. World War Second. The activities of the Prajamandal slowed down during the Second World War. However, during the Quit India movement, Ramchandra Satpathy, Lakshman Satpathy, Mohan Mishra, Chaturbhuja Mishra, Satyananda Hota, Dhanavanta Malik, Nandalal Sethi, Damodar Rath, and Dasarathi Rath, etc., were detained for more than 2 years. A salient feature of the time was the participation of students in the activities of Prajamandal. Narasingha Prasad Nanda, a student of Ravensa College, and Duryodhan Satpathy, Suresh Mishra, Satyanarayana Mishra, etc., of Sanpur High School formed a students' congress and organized a meeting under the presidency of Sri Lakshman Satpathy. A huge meeting of Prajamandal was organized for 3 days in May 1946 at Bakchera village under the Sarangadhar Das. About 40,000 people participated in the meetings. Prajamandal in Mayurbhanj. In 1940, the Prajamandal was formed in Mayurbhanj. Sarath Chandra Das was its president. To denigrate the Prajamandal in the eyes of the people, the king formed a parallel government organization known as the Prajamandal and started delivering assistance to the people. But the Prajamandal slowly and steadily pursued the movement in a non-violent manner. On 16th September 1947, it presented a charter of demands to the king Maharaja Pratap Chandra Bhanjadev. The charter specifically demanded reforms in the administration. As a result, the king was forced to form a three-man cabinet which included Sarath Chandra Das. He became a constitutional monarch looking after the well-being of the people, though very late. The Mayurbhanj Prajamandal had achieved success beyond expectations. Other places. The Prajamandal movement was witnessed in other parts of Odisha also. Notable among them were Kendrapada, Patna, and Kalahandi. The people had become quite conscious about their rights. Through the Prajamandal, By non-violent means, they were successful in presenting their viewpoint to their prospective kings. Many leaders of Congress addressed the Prajas and greatly helped them in activating their movement. It resulted in making the Prajamandal movement in Odisha successful to a very large degree. Consequences of the Prajamandal movement. The results of the Prajamandal movement in Odisha. First, it was successful in putting forth the demands of the people in very forceful way. Killing of Bazilgate made the fact brutally clear. Hence, the kings became tolerant towards the people to certain degree. In second point, in 1939, the government of Odisha set up a state inquiry committee. In 1939, the government of Odisha set up a state inquiry committee and came to know the reasons for the movement. It was evident that excessive oppression by the kings was the root cause of the movement. Third, the people realized that non-violence was the most effective weapon they possessed, and they had a firm conviction that it was through this their demands could be fulfilled. Finally, the Prajamandal movement was catalyst in accelerating the process of merger of the Gajrat or the native princely states. The Prajamandal movement opened a new chapter in the history of Odisha, tyrannized by the kings for generations. The people finally raised their voice against the institution of monarchy as a whole and were successful to very large extent in achieving their lands. The Congress too rendered assistance to the people in this democratic campaign. The Prajamandal movement sounded the death knell of monarchy in Odisha. That's it for today. In the next In the next, when I study, I am going to discuss the Quit India movement in Odisha. Namaskar.